Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this July meeting of East Cambs District Council Planning Committee. I notice we've got a few, what I think are new people in the gallery, and I'd just like to say to you, welcome. And the way we're going to run this meeting, as we always do, is roughly speaking, we'll have a comfort break at 2 hours, but we'll just see how it falls. In the meantime, should you wish to use our facilities, it's out that door and turn left, or out to that door and go straight on. So just please help yourself if you want. But I will be doing a comfort break. There looks like a load of people just sitting at desks looking at you, and the councillors along here are elected members. They will be making the decisions, and you'll hear their names as they're called out to speak, as they will. The rest of along here, my vice chairman here is Councillor Goodall. My name is Bill Hunt. I'm the chairman. We're both elected members as well. The officers are around here. They advise us, but they don't make decisions. So with that in mind, first of all, we'll go to our fire safety recording notice. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any tests scheduled, so if the fire alarm does sound, please leave by the nearest exit, which is here and behind me there. Please do not use the lift when leaving the building, and the assembly point is in the car park in front of the building.
Thank you. So we now go on to apologies and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have a number of apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Christine Ambrose-Smith, Councillor Mark Goldsack, Councillor Chika Akanwale, Councillor John Trapp, and Councillor Christine Whelan. Councillor Julia Huffer is substituting for Councillor Ambrose-Smith, and Councillor Keith Horgan is substituting for Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Members, declarations of interest. We'll go around the table. First of all, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a prejudicial interest in items 8 and 9 on the agenda.
Sorry, would you speak up a bit louder?
I'm so sorry, I'll have another go. I have a prejudicial interest in items 8 and 9 on the agenda.
So what do you intend to do about it?
I am advised by the officers that I may take part in the debate, and I am permitted to vote.
So you have that from the monitoring officer who will tell me.
Just clarify, Chair, I have given Councillor Colbert a dispensation for this meeting.
So she can speak
for
out.
agenda items 8 and 9.
Okay,
to participate.
Thank you. Any other declaration? Oh, yeah.
it is not clear whether the existing insulation meets the requirements of current building regulations. Based on the 2022 plans, the walls were 300 millimetres thick all round. It would be surprising that a store or an office would have been built with insulation of the standard that would be required for a dwelling unless it was designed to be a separate dwelling from the outset. The same might be the case for the foundations. Are they of required design and depth to satisfy the current building regulations? It is clear this was built as a separate dwelling with its own bathroom and kitchen, designed as such from the outset to contravene planning regulation. The planning application says annex, but this is not the case here. Would not an office and store be more appropriate to be built as an extension rather than a separate building away from the main house and accessed independently? Its continued existence will always be suspect. Imposing a condition that this building is only to be subsidiary to the main house is difficult to enforce, as subsidiarity may be tenuously defined. For example, what degree of cousinship of a future occupant would be acceptable as being subsidiary? This will cause future problems for enforcement, as it has already been done when it was occupied illegally. Permission for this development may result in the flouting of planning regulations by others in the district, citing this application, should it be approved as a precedent. Retrospective planning applications should be judged not on what has been built so far, but on whether it would have been accepted at the planning stage. To my mind, approval of a separate dwelling on this site would not have been approved had it been submitted in 2022. What we have here is a ratchet effect, starting with an approved planning application, build something different, and then when rumbled, put in a retrospective planning application. I would urge you to consider rejecting this application that has, from the outset in 2022, been designed to be something different in its stated aim, and to request that the building be made to conform to what has been approved in the previous application.
Thank you very much for that, Patrick. And we now go back to any comments from the officer as a result of what you've heard. Okay, and now questions for the officer. Away we go.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just establish that the principle of development has already been established with the original planning permission, and what happens internally in that plan within that building is kind of up to whoever builds it, but the actual basic outline principle of a dwelling or a building on that site has already been established with the approval of the previous planning permission. If you could clarify that for me.
Firstly, as a point of clarification, the 2022 application wasn't for planning permission. It was for a certificate of lawfulness. So it was to basically state that the building itself did not require planning permission by virtue of its size and potential use. So as it's within the residential curtilage of a dwelling, yes, the principle of a building there has been agreed. This building itself is slightly larger than that, hence why we have a planning application in front of us, because it's slightly over, I'm led to believe, the sizes that are allowable under permitted development. But both our local plan and the legislation allow for outbuildings of a reasonable size in a rear garden. The only control we would normally put on an outbuilding, and it's within PD, it requires it to be incidental to the use of a dwelling house, which is subtly different to ancillary, but potato to potato, really. So the requirement is that it's functionally linked to the dwelling house, and it's a use which you'd normally expect to find within a dwelling house. Here we have an annex, which is slightly different because it has all the facilities that you would require for day-to-day life. So what we mean by that is a space to sleep, a space to wash, a space to cook. But officers consider the building itself to be of an appropriate size, and as long as its functional link remains to the main dwelling house, it's in line with our policies and national policies. 23 of the agenda. You'll see it's annotated. I think it's quite hard to see there because it's a bit pixelated, but it says 2660, I believe.
Yeah.
Apologies if I've got that wrong. For it to be PD, it will be 2500. So you're talking about a difference there of 15 centimetres, give or take. So, and what we would say to members is what we look at when we're looking at things which are larger than permitted development is what is the additional harm which is created by that additional height. And does it create a development where you'd then consider to be unacceptable by virtue of that difference? With regards to your first question, so apologies for doing it in reverse order. When we say that something is ancillary, it needs to be functionally linked. So normally it would be the family or whoever is using the main house would then have use of that outbuilding. So normally buildings of this type and annex of this type, it would be a teenage son, for example, or a granny annex or something like that. So if the main house is rented out, the expectation would be, as per the two conditions that we've put on the agenda, so conditions 2 and 3, that the expectation would be that the whole thing would be rented out as one. So that is to retain that relationship between that and the host dwelling. So the expectation is that anyone that can use the outbuilding should be able to use the host dwelling and vice versa. Okay. So the two conditions we've got on there are that it should remain used for purposes ancillary, but there's also a secondary one there which protects its use as an Airbnb on its own right, which is the annex hereby approved shall not be sold or let separately or occupied as an individual unit of accommodation at any time. So those are fairly standard conditions. Members will know my background years ago is enforcement and in London, so this is not something which is new to me, and that is a fairly standard way of dealing with it, and it can be dealt with through either a breach of condition notice or a full enforcement notice if it's never brought into the lawful use.
Councillor Lay.
Thank you, Chair. I know we've talked about the fencing that's around the property at the moment, and I just wonder whether or not, as part of that taking down of that fence, that we might consider closing off the front access so that the gap that you walk through to get to the back has to be accessible exactly the same way as you would get into the back garden of what is closed off at the moment. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying, Councillor. My view on that would be is that's probably going beyond what we require to make it acceptable, because we don't normally require people to have fences or to have boundary treatments unless they should choose to want them. So block by effectively what you'll be doing there is that gap down the side. Historically, from my understanding of when we visited the site, looks to me like it was either a previous driveway or an access to a garage, or maybe even had a garage on it at some point. So whilst I understand what you're saying, I think personally, and members can obviously take a different view to this, but my view is by removing the fence, that creates one garden area, one area, and retains that functional link. And it's then for the property owner to decide how they best want to obviously enclose their property.
Thank you. Is that all questions to the officers? In which case, I'd just like confirmation, if I may, David. One assumes that the power, the electricity and the water are being dealt with through the main building.
Yeah, whilst we don't have control over that, I didn't normally, it's the sort of thing that jumps out at me when I look at these things from my cynical past, let's say. I didn't notice a separate meter box or anything like on my building. So whilst I didn't go specifically looking for it, I think the assumption would be that it's probably run off the main house. As long as it's used in the same functional way, I'm not too concerned about that. However, that is something we do look at potentially if there is a problem.
So that's something, should the committee be minded to approve it, we could actually say that this would be checked, that there was a one power source and one water source.
It's not normally a planning related matter. Sometimes, historically, when you're seeking to sever something which has been built separately, that is something that we can ask to be removed under an enforcement notice. It's not something that I would normally want to be conditioning or looking at particularly for a planning application, if that makes sense. Because it's something that's facilitating a use. It's not necessarily something which is determinative in its own right.
So it's not necessary, it's optional.
That would be my view, yes.
Okay, right, we now go on to debate. Members.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm quite happy to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation to approve this application, subject to the two conditions of removing the fence and also removing any further development rights on the property, I think is what was suggested by the planning officer and the planning manager. I think it's an inoffensive building. I think it is an annex in the true sense of the word. And as long as all the conditions are met, I can see, you couldn't see it from the road. I can't see it, it's overlooked or overlooking. I see absolutely no harm in it whatsoever. It's a little bit naughty going the way they did, but they weren't the first and they won't be the last. So I'm quite happy to recommend approval, subject to the addition of the two conditions.
Just a second.
Sorry, Councillor Huffer, can I just ask for clarification that you're happy to delegate the wording of those two conditions to myself?
Absolutely, David,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Okay, so we now have you ever got a seconder? Okay, Keith, well done. Other members debate. Away we go. Councillor Colbert.
I was just going to say that I absolutely agree with everything that Councillor Huffer said. I'm very happy to go along with approval.
Okay, any other? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, yeah, I think my concerns have been answered, and as Councillor Huffer says, they've not gone around it. I don't like people going around it this way, where they go ahead and do it beforehand. But I think I would agree with the proposal.
Thank you very much. Any other members want to say anything? Well, we have a proposal and we have it seconded, and the proposal is that as it in the agenda, but with the conditions to be the fine tuning to be done by the head of planning. When that being the case, will those of you who are in favour of the officer's recommendation please raise their hands? Well, that's unanimous, so that permission is granted. I don't know if any of you are involved with that particular application. Okay, so we will now move on to agenda item 6 with the officer's proposal.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. This is agenda item 6, which is to build a purpose-built wildlife hospital, which includes residential facilities at Landorf Water Lane, Longacre in Kirtling. Just a quick update before I start the presentation. Since the committee report and agenda have been published, we've had some additional comments, 2 objecting and 1 in support. All 3 of these have commented previously on the application, and the comments were taken into account in coming to a recommendation. So this slide shows the outline of the site in red. And then I have a map version of this. Just bear with me a second. The development envelope is around this area labelled Kirtling Green. So the site is here, the development envelope boundary is around here. So just some pictures of the site. For those of you who visited this morning, you'll probably appreciate it's quite difficult to take pictures of it, but this is looking towards the access and the areas where the containers are currently sited. And then we've got one looking towards the south of the site here. And then a view along Water Lane, the one to the right is looking north and the one to the left is looking south. So the main considerations of this application are the principle of development, visual amenity, residential amenity, highway safety and parking, ecology, flood risk and drainage, and climate change. So to start with the principle of development, policy growth 2 states that outside of development envelopes, development will be strictly controlled. It's limited to the categories set out within the policy, which this proposal does not fall within any of those exception policies and therefore would be unacceptable in principle. To allow us to depart from policy, there would need to be a sufficient justification as to why the hospital would need to be sited in this specific location. So the applicant has provided an alternative sites assessment setting out which sites were considered and concluded that the location of this land is the only viable location. This is because the site is accessible enough to bring in casualties while still being quiet and away from roads, housing and power lines, allowing wildlife the best chance of recovery. And at the same time, the existing volunteer team would be able to continue. However, no real justification has been provided as to why this location would be required. Under the alternate sites assessment, it was noted that largely the alternative land became unavailable or it was too far for volunteers to go. It's also noted in respect of 2 of the sites that they're actually larger than the application site proposed, but were considered to be too small, so insufficient. So the land within this red line is approximately 1.18 acres, which is approximately 4,775 square meters. And so that is actually smaller than a couple of the sites that were discounted. This suggests that the scale of the site might not be large enough for the operation and further land may be required. There's also no specific information as to why this location is essential or suitable for the care and rewilding of animals. One of the council's concerns regarding the locations is that there is a badger set in close proximity, and therefore it would be difficult to rewild hedgehogs as they would likely be preyed upon by badgers. There also appears to be a mix of uses on the site with the presence of an agricultural barn. That's part of the proposal. This is to potentially house large animals, but it is not clear how or whether this is ancillary to the hospital. It's also set out this will have a number of functions, so agricultural storage space for community engagement. We've also had a letter submitted with the application which states that it's essential that each UK regional area has one centre that can provide care for abandoned juvenile hedgehogs, and that's each 25-mile radius. It also states the proposed location is 40 to 50 miles distant from other such facilities, but it is unclear where the nearest wildlife hospitals are. For example, one letter we have received says that Pact in Norfolk is the closest, others say it's Shepworth. This is quite an important detail if the location of the hospital is to be justified on the basis that each regional area is able to access one centre. In addition to this, the hospital includes residential accommodation. It is noted that many statements made by professionals, such as vets, say someone needs to be on site 24/7. There's no real substantive information as to why this is. However, if we were to accept that a 24/7 presence was required, the information submitted states that there would be 3 full-time nurses employed for round-the-clock care. Therefore, if staff are employed at the site 24/7, it is considered that this would not require someone to live on the site and residential accommodation would not be required. There's been no information submitted as to how shift patterns would work or how many people would be on site at any one time. In addition, there's a static caravan shown on the plan that is noted as temporary staff accommodation, but there's no real explanation as to what this means. It's unclear whether this is temporary accommodation while the hospital is being built or for staff to sleep in on a temporary basis. So the proposal does not fall within exception to growth 2. It's therefore unacceptable in principle. And we consider there has been insufficient justification as to why the hospital needs to be in this specific location or why there is a need for someone to live on site. And therefore it's considered contrary to growth 2 of the local plan. So moving on to visual impact, this is a 3D visual of the site, which shows the hospital building, which is this one here, the agricultural barn, the green prefab building, which would be for a temporary classroom, and the static caravan, which is the temporary staff accommodation. On the next slide, I've done the red star on the map shows where it is in context of the wider site. And this one on this side shows the red line boundary of the site and then the rest of the site that the applicant owns in the blue line. So it would be situated on a parcel of land along Water Lane. It's visible from a number of vantage points from Water Lane itself, from the public right-of-way which runs to the east of the site, and from Wooditton Road. As I've just set out, it consists of a hospital building, which would be a series of storage containers linked together and clad. This building will be approximately 39 metres or 127 foot at its widest point, 19 metres or 62 foot deep at its deepest point, and 3 metres or 9.8 foot in height, excluding the solar panels. It's considered it would change the character of the area. It would project a large amount of development into the countryside. The use of storage containers in prefab buildings have a high potential to result in poor quality design. There's a tree belt along the northern boundary of the site, which does screen it on approach from Water Lane. And there is tree planting and cladding proposed, which may go some way to assimilating the development, but we cannot rely on landscaping in perpetuity. In addition, the application site contains a lot of development within the site, making it appear very full. It includes 4 buildings, but there is also hard standing for access and car parking. And it's considered that the quantum of development proposed would result in an overdevelopment of the site. So it's considered it would result in significant harm to the character and appearance of the area due to the scale, amount and design of development, and therefore is contrary to the local plan. So moving on to residential amenity. It's considered that the physical development itself wouldn't harm the amenity of neighbouring dwellings. In addition, the council's environmental health officer has raised no concerns in respect of the proposal and no issues in respect of the lighting proposed, but has recommended a condition to prevent additional external lighting without express permission of the LPA. There's a concern that there will be the potential for noise and disturbance to neighbouring properties, but there's little information provided with the application to say how the site would actually operate. So, for example, in respect of traffic movements, the information says there would be 10 to 15 a day, including staff and volunteers dropping off injured animals and deliveries. However, it says there would be 3 full-time vet nurses, 3 part-time assistants, 1 part-time admin assistant and a hospital manager. And it sets out there are currently 20 volunteers. The information submitted also gives the impression that existing volunteers do not live locally, so would need to drive as public transport is limited. There's no information as to how many staff and volunteers would be on site on any one time regarding shift patterns and when people would be moving to and from the site. It also sets out the living room of the residents would be used for conference facilities. There's an educational classroom. The multi-purpose barn would provide a space for community engagement, and the local groups want to help with the projects such as brownies and guides. But there's no indication as to the scope or frequency of these uses, or which have the potential to create traffic movements and noise and disturbance. So therefore, we consider that the proposal lacks sufficient information to fully assess the potential impacts to residential amenity of neighbouring dwellings and is therefore contrary to the local plan. Sorry, excuse me a moment. So onto highway safety and parking. The site would be accessed from Water Lane. The local highway authority have objected to the proposal as it is not supported by sufficient transport information to demonstrate that the proposed development would not be prejudicial to the satisfactory functioning of the highway or highway safety. This additional information would be required to enable the local highway authority to establish whether the proposal is considered acceptable and what conditions may be required to mitigate the impact of the development on the public highway if necessary. They've also noted that the proposals include an educational classroom and specific detail would be required regarding the expected trip generation in relation to this. However, the local highway authority have concluded that it is apparent that adequate visibility is available along Water Lane. In respect of parking, there are 11 spaces proposed, which given the different uses mentioned within the submission, officers are not convinced would be sufficient, particularly as there are limited public transport options. However, without sufficient information as to the operation of the site in respect to the scale of some of the uses proposed and the shift patterns expected, this is very difficult to assess. And this is the same for the provision of cycle parking as well. So the proposal doesn't include sufficient information to allow the local highway authority or the local planning authority to be certain that there would be no significant impacts to the operation of the highway, to ascertain if any mitigation measures would be required, to ascertain what level of parking is proposed or whether the level proposed is suitable, and also cycle parking. So the proposal is therefore considered contrary to COM7 and COM8 of the local plan. Ecology. The council's senior ecologist has raised 2 objections to the proposal. The first is harm to protected species. This partly relates to the existing storage at the site, which has been placed within 30 metres of an active badger set, and a licence for disturbance would be required to remove the structures. In addition to this, the presence of badgers in close proximity to the site, infection control measures would need to be put in place to protect animals, but also to prevent sick animals infecting the native population. There is also concern that hedgehogs could not be released here as they would be eaten by the badgers. She has also raised concern that there is a large animal room in the hospital, but nowhere for them to recover, and the agricultural shed would not be appropriate due to the specific requirements of large animals, and the outdoor pens would be expected for acclimating animals for release. She has raised concern the red line boundary of the site may be too small as it is not accommodating the basic needs of sick animals. The second objection is that the protected road verge, which runs along Water Lane, which is shown on the slide, it's here, this that's marked, would be fragmented and partially removed. The road verge adjoins the county wildlife site, and therefore the proposal is currently contrary to ENV7 as it does not protect the biodiversity and geological value of the land, nor minimise harm or loss to environmental features. In respect of biodiversity net gain, the senior ecologist has objected on the basis that the baseline habitat is incorrect and the protected road verge needs to be factored into the habitats and accounted for within the metric with suitable mitigation included. The area for biodiversity improvements is shown as 0.58 hectares or 1.4 acres, which is greater than the site size, which means a revision of on-site habitats would need to occur. She's also queried the size of the plot in relation to the field use, why there is a koi pond shown on the plans and why it's required. Is concerned that it's not clear whether the educational classroom is for professional educational schools and why the bird room shown on the plans is not near an aviary, as the stress on native birds not being outside would likely kill them. The proposal has the potential to result in harm to protected species, and there are serious concerns regarding the potential rewilding of hedgehogs in close proximity to a badger set. In addition, it would result in the partial removal of protected road verge, which has not been mitigated against. So there's insufficient information submitted for the LPA to be satisfied that proposal would not result in harm to protected species and would protect, mitigate and enhance biodiversity. It's contrary to the local plan, the Natural Environment SPD, the NPPF, as well as failing to meet the overarching objectives of the Environment Act 2021 in achieving net gains in biodiversity and protection of irreplaceable habitats. So on to other matters. There has been concern raised that the site lacks basic infrastructure. There's been very limited information submitted in relation to this, and where it has been mentioned, it is inconsistent. In respect of drainage, there are very minimal details submitted, but both the soakways and septic tank mentioned in the application would require building regulations and would therefore need to comply with this, and the septic tank may also require an Environment Agency permit. The proposal does have some sustainability benefits, for example, reusing existing storage containers and incorporating solar panels. However, it is considered that this could be increased. There's been reference made throughout the application and the comments received as to ECDC supporting hedgehogs through the adoption of the hedgehog SPD. However, this is to inform the reader what the average developer should do, such as creating hedgehog highways as part of their development, rather than express any type of support for a development of this nature. There's also been concern raised that it does not appear to have been a sustainable business or funding plan. We wouldn't routinely seek this in relation to an application unless clearly relevant. However, it is noted in the ecological impact assessment that the timings for development are unknown, but it's likely to be in phases as funding becomes available. The application lacks clarity on various issues, including the general operation of the site, the scope of uses proposed, such as the conferencing facility and the vehicle movements. The documents also lack consistency with different information across the documents, which has made this application very hard to assess. So just a weighing up exercise here on the screen. So there's undoubtedly a lot of support for this application, as evidenced by the number of positive comments we've received. There are a number of positive elements to the application, such as it brings benefits to those who volunteer at the current establishment. In addition, it would provide training opportunities for vet nurses. Letters of support have also been submitted from vets, other wildlife hospitals and charities, including the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. However, all of this does hold very limited weight in the planning balance. When considering the material planning considerations and planning policy, which holds significant weight, the proposal is unacceptable in principle, results in harm to the character and appearance of the area, and lacks sufficient information to assess the impacts of the proposal to residential community, highway safety, parking, and biodiversity. In addition, the proposal is not complying with the legal requirement to provide 10% biodiversity net gain due to an incorrect baseline habitat. So, in summary, it is considered that while there is a lot of support for the proposal, there have been objections received from residents who live close to the site and from the parish council. Weight has been given to the letters of support from vets and other wildlife professionals. However, there are no material planning considerations that outweigh the significant conflict with policy outlined in this report and the resulting 5 reasons for refusal. There is also no material reasons for us to depart from policy. Therefore, the proposal is recommended for refusal.
Thank you very much indeed. We now have a letter from Simon Goodaham, which will be read out.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, we've had 2 letters of objection, and if it's okay to you, that I can read out both of them.
Yes, read out what you've got there.
Thank you. This is a letter of objection from objection statement by owners of 1 and 2 Primrose Cottages, Oak Farmhouse and Oak Farm Barn, Wood Road, Kirtling, to application 25-00371 FUL, proposal to build a wildlife veterinary hospital, including residential facilities, land off Water Lane, Longacre, Kirtling. Chair and members of the committee, we are submitting this statement as local residents and immediate neighbours to the proposed development and land off Water Lane in Kirtling. We strongly object to this application and we urge you to refuse it. The properties directly affected by the site are the true neighbours and those who will be most impacted. Those residents most impacted by the proposal were not included in the village consultation undertaken by the applicant, and we've all outlined serious concerns from noise, visual harm, traffic impact and inappropriate development, which is contrary to local and national planning policy in this location. A quick glance at the planning portal gives the impression of overwhelming neighbour support. However, the vast majority of the 100 or so supporting letters come from individuals with no connection to the area. Many live far from outside the village, Bury St Edmunds, Ely, Soham, Woodbridge and even London. These are not genuine neighbour responses and give a deeply misleading impression of local support. They should not be given the same weight as those of immediate residents. This is not a vote of confidence in the applicant's care for wildlife. That is not in question. It is a planning decision about whether this agricultural field in open countryside is the right place for a multi-container wildlife hospital, permanent managers accommodation, staff housing, and all that comes with it. Vehicle movements, industrial batteries, noise, lighting, and a risk of creeping development. The site lies outside Kirtling Village development envelope on Grade 2 agricultural land and is therefore in conflict with East Cambridge's local plan. There is no agricultural justification, no proven local need, and no exception criteria are met. It threatens to set a dangerous precedence for rural resident expansion. Already, containers in a porta cabin have appeared on site without the correct permissions. The visual damage is immediate and obvious. Further research has uncovered the applicant speaking publicly about long-term ambitions to add log cabins for terminally ill patients, as well as events and training facilities. This raises serious concern about the true scale and future trajectory of the project. Once residential use is granted, the door is opened and it may not be easily closed again. In addition, the site is immediately adjacent to a known badger set, a legally protected habitat, noise, light and construction pose significant ecological risks to a protected species, and the proposed development and associated use is incompatible with its proximity to the badger set. These images have not been addressed by the application. Our parish council has unanimously objected on a number of grounds, including impact on local residents and an inappropriate development in an open countryside location. There is already a fully equipped, respected hedgehog hospital operating at Shepworth Wildlife Park, just 25 miles away. The absence of a transport assessment, despite clear intensification of narrow access roads, renders the application incomplete and adds to its inappropriateness for this location. County highways have objected to the proposal. To conclude, this is an emotive application, but planning must be guided by policy, not sentiment. This development would cause irreversible harm to the local environment, set a damaging precedent, and is contrary to all local and national planning policy. We urge you to refuse the application in full. I have a second letter of objection from Mr. Christopher Walker. Objection. Plans to build a purpose-built wildlife veterinary hospital, including residential facilities at Water Lane, Kirtling. I had intended to attend the planning committee tomorrow, but due to unforeseen circumstances, I'm now not able to. I will be following the planning committee meeting online. Further to my letter of 19th of May 2025, I have since read the planning statement submitted by the applicant and note at the paragraph 1.5 it is stated that the case officer explained the baseline view is that it would be unacceptable as development and a new house in the countryside, but acknowledged its incredibly unique and exceptional circumstances had no fit in current planning policies. It would therefore be seen as exceptional. Planning law and policies are put in place to ensure that the environment and the character of towns, villages and the countryside are protected. There are no doubt many circumstances in which an applicant seeking planning permission would argue that their proposed development should be seen as exceptional, particularly when it includes constructing residential accommodation in a location where planning permission would not otherwise be granted. This proposed development cannot truly be viewed as exceptional. The planning statement should be properly weighted against current planning laws and policies. Several supporters of this application are referred to the provision of education activities. This would significantly increase vehicle traffic to and from the proposed site. If the Hedgehog Hospital referred to in this application is to be moved from its current location in Ousden to Water Lane, most of the additional vehicle traffic will approach the site via Maltings End. The minor roads around the proposed site, particularly Malting End and Wood Ditton Road, are not able to cater for a significant increase in vehicle traffic, as evidenced by the erosion of the verges and the edges of the tarmac surfaces. Vehicles are often required to pull onto the verge as there are no designated passing places. If this application is granted, it's highly unlikely that the proposed site will return to agricultural use. It's difficult to imagine what use would be made of the structures on the site other than the residential accommodation in the event that the Hedgehog Wildlife Hospital were to close. This is not a fanciful possibility given what is said about other wildlife facilities. At some stage, the applicant would need to hand over responsibility for running the hospital to someone else. Presumably this would, in view of what has been said about the need for residential accommodation, require additional permanent residential accommodation to be provided. I'd be grateful if this letter would be considered when the council determines whether to grant the application and to be kept informed of further developments. Yours sincerely, Christopher Walker.
Thank you very much. Since the writers of those letters aren't here, we can't ask them questions. So we now move on to Angie Curtis and Sue Stubley, who are going to make a presentation on behalf of the applicants. Well, please help yourself to a seat. Start when you want and make sure you press the button to get the microphone on. You've got 5 minutes. An amber sign will light will come on at 4. That's it.
Well, thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. Sue Stubley wanted to be here, but she has had an influx of animals which need her attention to survive. We understand that this application has challenged the planning officers as it is so unusual and incomparable to any other developments. Contrary to opinions expressed within the reports, this veterinary wildlife animal hospital plan is well thought out and it's supported by wildlife experts, including the local highly regarded vet Dick White and the South Essex Veterinary Wildlife Hospital. The NPPF and the local development plan make virtually no mention of the impact that people have on wildlife. From road casualties to loss of habitat, the indigenous wild animals with whom we share this district are losing the battle to survive against human incursion. That is why the Suffolk Hedgehog Hospital has continued to grow in the types and numbers of animals it helps, especially as other rescue centres continue to close. The hospital has taken over every part of Sue's life and home. Every year she takes in over 1,000 animals. Alongside hedgehogs, this year Sue has treated a leveret, a badger cub rather, fox cubs, ducks and ducklings, baby birds including blue tit, starling and dunnock, baby rabbits, a stoat, an owl, and today a buzzard. Shepworth only takes hedgehogs. It's 29 miles away. Wildlife hospitals are even more distant. Smaller rescue centres refer their most serious cases to Sue, and they rely on her expertise to guide their care. The revised ecology report changed its opinion from no objection to a variety of arguments of why this site is unsuitable. With the greatest of respect, we would argue that this opinion is wrong. The site is perfect for its planned purpose. The arrangement of buildings is designed to enable the animals to be treated appropriately, healed, and prepared for release. Predators and prey will not be close. Hedgehogs are never released in this type of location. Most are returned to the location where they were found to continue their lives in a familiar environment or returned to a release site which will meet their needs. The badger's set will not be disturbed and confirms the suitability of the site. The ryegrass grown on the field is a farmed crop. Sue met with an officer and explained her plan to rewild the field with plants for a hay meadow to give better biodiversity. The entire field was not included in the application, as we understood the pre-application advice to be that a smaller site would be more likely to meet the approval of the council. We took it as a given that the entire field would provide context for the development. The highways concerns were not significant at the early stages, and it almost feels as if the reports have been created to justify the recommendation to refuse. The containers were wrongly installed on site, with no ill intent, but a desperate need to accept gifts which would help the charity build the hospital most cost effectively. The alternative was to lose them. They will be clad to blend into the site and are intended to minimise the undeniable visual impact. In terms of scale, the barn is no more nor less intrusive than other agricultural buildings found locally. The hospital uses less than 5% of the field. The static caravan will allow Sue to provide the round-the-clock care during the build. The build will be more environmentally friendly, requiring less construction materials and groundworks than other options. Sometimes a council has to stand up for things that really matter. There is nowhere in East Cambs district that provides the support to vets and high level of care to animals this hospital will deliver if built. Without it, there is the undeniable risk that Sue will be forced to close her doors and move away. There has been nowhere else in the area suitable for her in a property search that has taken years. The field isn't ideal, but it is the closest to ideal that Sue has been able to find in her extensive search. Planning policy is in a state of flux. It's our hope that increased flexibility could ultimately give us the permissions we need. Sue understands the needs of wild animals. Her track record and the endorsements from other wildlife organisations and experts of her work prove that. East Cambs District Council should show that it has the interests of all its residents at heart by granting this application. Our resident survey overwhelmingly supported the hospital. Vox Pops for East Cambs.
Time, if you can
Yeah,
wrap it up
very
quickly,
quickly.
please.
Vox Pops within East Cambs prove that the council's initiative to support hedgehogs and wildlife is one of its most popular initiatives. It would be very ironic if this same council chooses to refuse these precious creatures the vital life-saving support they need. And I have to ask you to accept that sometimes a policy cannot cover all the unique requirements of those most in need of its care and protection. And
the static caravan, they are still going to be on site. Is that correct?
there will be accommodation within the site for the people who are on site caring for the animals.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions, Angie, on what, and it may well be in the report, and I couldn't see it. Water and electricity. Because I know you're talking about solar panels, and I think there's reference to a wind. But are you looking at being self-sufficient in electricity?
We're looking to be self-sufficient with water and electricity. Sue's had a survey done of the site for a water borehole, and that can be created. One of the wind turbines would be to provide a pump for the water borehole. There'd be two small wind turbines, one for the water borehole, one to augment the solar panels for electricity.
Yes, please carry on.
Again, if I've missed it, I'm trying to, where would that be on the, is it on the site plan?
I have to be totally honest, I'll hold my hands up. In preparing this planning application, it has been a nightmare because we don't know the rules. And we tried 3 different planning consultants. We got our money back off of 2 of them because they just didn't do any work. It has been a nightmare. So ultimately, I have to hold my hands up. That application has been prepared mainly by Sue and I with the best of intentions, huge amounts of effort. And I'm sorry if we've missed things, but we're not planning experts. We want to build a hospital. And I would have to say that we would have been more than happy to go away and address all of these questions, but we were left with a fait accompli. We were informed that if we didn't accept the refusal, then tough. And we can't accept a refusal because we need to build the hospital. If we had been given the opportunity to go away and address those points under consideration and given time to do it, we would have been more than happy to do that. So I could almost, I know it's not my place, I could almost make a proposal to you today. If you gave us the opportunity to address the points that the officers have raised, I would be more than happy to commit to doing that. But we couldn't do it in a week because Sue is, as you've seen, but she isn't here today. She's looking after animals. It takes time. And it's very difficult. I mean, we want to get this thing sorted and decided as quickly as we can, but it's difficult.
We have a system
Yeah.
called a pre-app,
We used it.
and you will have been advised at that pre-app
Yeah,
what to do.
we did. And we thought we had followed it. I can't tell you, Councillor Hunt, the amount of time we've spent working through that thing. And to be fair to your officers, I've rung the officers and they must be sick of the sound of my voice, asking for their advice and their help. And everything, we have tried and tried to give as much information as we can within.
A lot of that hasn't filtered through
It
into the
hasn't filtered through.
application.
This is why I say that because there are two, and I can't remember them, there's a 2 and a 3 on the officers, on the council's response to an application. One is an out and out refusal or recommendation to refuse, and the other one is go away and do it better. And we got no, we're not going to consider it.
Can you direct your conversation with me, the chair? And
sorry.
And I'm really trying to find out
absolutely.
what went on.
Yeah.
And you will appreciate that we are part of local government and we have to work within
I
laws
understand that.
and regulations. And although people may be delighted and entranced by hedgehogs, there's things that have to be done by the law.
And
that I'm now going to stop speaking and I'll carry on now with my members, but they will ask you a question, I'm sure. So Councillor Colbert.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. The first thing I want to get clear in my mind is the buildings. So am I correct in thinking that you propose, in addition to the buildings for the animals, that you propose to have some building which is effectively a staff room for their use whilst they're on shifts or possibly resting between shifts?
What would be happening is, sorry about that. Yeah, effectively what we will have is some staff accommodation. The amount of staff we'll have on site in any time. I mean, typically at the moment, she only has about 2 volunteers plus herself. So at the most, there would be probably 4 people on site, I would think. The 3 full-time people was because we were trying to explain what the economic benefit would be over time. We didn't mean that as of day one, we'll be suddenly employing all these people down there because, of course, that wouldn't happen. But the goal will be, obviously, from everybody's sanity and their health, to have a shift pattern of 3 people every 24 hours.
Okay, thank you. And a visitor centre, is this proposed for the somewhat distant future?
Not so much a visitor centre, because obviously the big thing is this isn't a zoo, this isn't a petting zoo, this is a hospital. There are vet nurses who, if you take I don't know, an injured badger or a fox cub or whatever it might be to a vet, they really, and certainly hedgehogs, they don't know what to do with them. So they tend to call Sue and Sue takes them away and deals with them. So the idea is to create a classroom where they can be taught. If we have that facility on site, then obviously there's a real benefit in enabling Girl Guides and Brownies to come along. And there are only so many Girl Guides and Brownies, and we would never have probably more than 10 on site at a time anyway, I don't think. And they'd come by minibus, I would imagine.
Okay, so is if you'll pardon the pun, koi pond a bit of a red herring?
No. Well, yes, it is actually, because the koi pond, somebody in Soham abandoned a pond full of koi. So we don't want koi carp. Nobody asked for them. They're living in Sue's garden currently. But that's why we have koi carp. they're fish that nobody would give a home to.
Okay, thank you. And finally, about the water. So
Yes.
if you have a borehole, so what are you planning to use the water for? Just flushing loos and things? Because presumably you'd need to treat it in some
Purify a
way.
little, you can get purification, you know, if you look in Africa and things like that, you have purification tablets and things. You can easily now chemically purify water if necessary. And then there'll be rainwater runoff as well, obviously.
Right. Okay. Well, I won't worry myself about public health regulations. Yeah. Thank you very much for all
Thank
of
you.
that.
Councillor Holden.
Thank you, Chair. Just got a couple of questions. One's, well, actually three. First one's around the construction materials, because are you talking about building a building as we would expect a hospital to be built? I did employ a builder, a contractor to come in and physically build it from the ground up with foundations, etc., etc. Only I've heard mention of containers, porter cabins. What is it, first of all? That's my
Okay.
first question.
It's the hospital will be built using converted porta cabins. There will be a base, obviously, for the containers to stand on, but the joy of using containers rather than a building is you don't need the groundworks that you would need for a building. For example, two of the containers that shouldn't be but are on site are actually completely fitted medical units that were in Afghanistan and were donated to the hospital by marshals. So it is possible to do that. Some of the containers will actually have the sides cut out so that you have a double width, if you will, and then they'll be joined together. But yeah, the site will be constructed using containers because it is quite an environmentally sound way, and not by me, but quite a lot of research has gone into it to prove that actually we can make a very functional building for the hospital out of containers.
Continue. Thank you. My second question. You mentioned that you want the site to be self-sustainable. Yeah, in the planning application, I think you admitted that there was no information around wind turbines or any other way of sustaining the power that you're going to be needed 24 hours a day, because, you know, if somebody's doing an emergency operation in the middle of the night on an animal, the last thing you need is
have a power cut.
Yeah, you can have a power cut. So have you got somebody involved in the project at this stage that understands how renewable energy is unreliable and cannot be used exclusively without backup from the mains?
It can be used without backup from the mains, but we will need to have a generator on site as an emergency backup in extremis. But the goal will be very much to rely on solar power, some battery stored, and on wind power created and you know, delivered to the site.
Thank you. My last question is the lady, I think you mentioned her name was Sue.
Yes.
What medical qualifications does she have?
She doesn't have any. But she is an equestrian. She's worked very closely with vets she's been running the hospital for 17 years. Prior to that, she's been working with animals all of her life. And a lot of looking after wildlife, I am learning, is you see what works. And she spent 17 years seeing what works. And if I can just make one comment, which isn't about strimming, the biggest problem that she has is animals coming in that have been strimmed. And the problem with a lot of the strimmed animals is they're strimmed across their back. And then what happens is the vets, bless them, decide to stitch up the wound. Once they've done that, the hedgehog is doomed because it's not doomed because we find safe places for them to live, but they can never be released into the wild again because they lose the function of being able to curl up. And but if you don't have the expertise, you don't know it, and that's that's the type of expertise that Sue has.
That's it. We're okay, you've had your answer, yeah? Okay, so we are now on to Karen Gray, a letter be read out.
Thank you, Chair. This is a letter of support.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Thank you. You can go back to your seat now. And turn the microphone off. Thank you.
So this is just a letter of support from a neighbour. Today I'm writing to you in support of Sue Stubley of Suffolk Hedgehog Hospital to be granted planning permission to open a wildlife hospital at Water Lane, Kirtling. We personally believe that a wildlife hospital in this area is long overdue. We as a family have travelled hundreds of miles over the years in search of places to take injured out wildlife so they may receive the best love, care and expertise to enable them the best chance possible to be helped and hopefully go on to enjoy the rest of their lives. What has become apparent in my quest to find help is that wonderful places such as the one proposed are so few and far between, hence the need to travel so far to find help. Obviously, when an animal is sick or injured, long car journeys can cause them so much added stress which impacts on their chances of recovery. The proposed wildlife hospital would be such an amazing asset for our wildlife. Sadly, in this day and age, humans are responsible for so much suffering. It was only a very short time ago that I took a poor little hedgehog to Sue that had lost her foot. Highly likely the result of some irresponsible person not checking an area before stream moving. Just imagine the amount of suffering and pain this poor little hog went through. What I'm trying to say here is that we as humans should be trying to help them as much as we possibly can, and give permission for this wildlife hospital is one way of doing exactly that. Last but by no means least, Sue and her team are absolutely amazing. The work that they do can never be underestimated, and they have helped me on more than one occasion with injured hedgehogs. But now the time has come that they need to expand on what they are currently able to offer. They're in such desperate need of more space and larger facilities as demand for the help is so extremely high. I sincerely hope that permission will be granted, as I personally believe that dedication like theirs should be encouraged every step of the way. Kind regards, Mrs. Karen Gray.
Thank you very much indeed. We've now got to the stage where officers can make additional comments as a result of what they've heard.
Just a few points I'd like to pick up on. Thank you, Chair. Our ecologist did initially write in support of the application. However, she then visited the site and came back and said she had a strong objection to the proposal, which is what's been set out in my officer report and presentation. It's been mentioned that pre-app advice was undertaken. While I can't say too much about that, I will say that the main sort of thrust of that advice was that this was unacceptable in principle. I'd also just like to say there is residential accommodation in the hospital itself. I'm not sure if that was entirely clear. It consists of a master bedroom, kitchen, living, dining room and bathroom. That is shown on page 46 of the agenda on the floor plan. And I'd also just like to say that the reason that we didn't allow amendments to the application is because the council's adopted negotiation protocol sets out that where an application is substantially substandard in one or more respects, we will refuse without negotiation. If we had allowed amendments, the whole application would have basically need to have been redone. So that's the reason why, and that's the comments I'd like to make.
Members, questions for the officer? Councillor Lay.
Well, it's more an observation to the officers rather than a direct question. I think you've done a very good job, and I think you've provided us, irrespective of what isn't here, with enough information for us to come to a conclusion about this application. So thank you.
Any other members with questions for the officers? Away you go, Councillor Colbert.
Well, clarification really. It says that there's no planning history on the site. Well, presumably that's only going back to 1940 or whenever it was. Do we know if there's any history of any building at all on that area, or what the use was or has been previously?
So the planning system started in 1948. There's no history on the site back that far. I'm not aware of any buildings that have been present there. And as far as we're aware, the site has been in agricultural use.
Any more questions for the officers? Okay, in which case we go on to debate. And Julia, I think, was first, and then Councillor Horgan.
I'm going to be controversial. I would like to propose that we defer this item and give the applicants 2 months to get the information that the planning officer
consideration, the thought processes to go into how are we going to power this site, how are we going to build it, how are we going to run it and operate it, and it being run by somebody who has no medical qualifications at all, irrespective of the fact that for 17 years they've been involved allegedly in the care of wildlife. The fact that they've gone to three planning advisors already, and 2 of which they've had to reclaim their money from because they didn't really know how to build or propose to build what they're asking for. The problem is that if you, the applicant, don't really know what you want, and you go to an advisor who doesn't really know how to provide you with what you want and answer all of your questions when he doesn't even know what you really want, in 2 months, are we setting false expectations that somebody could go away and in 2 months come back with an acceptable list of answers that would enable us to come to a different view of this, a different to the recommendation from the planning officer? I suspect this has been going on for a while, and
give them a chance.
And to be honest, if in the time that's been taken thus far, you've not been able to get the information together, I don't want to set people's hopes running only to dash them again, because in 2 months' time they're asking for another month or another 2 months or just a little bit, and we haven't got this and we haven't got that. This could go on and on and on. And I think the message we really need to give is refuse the application, which is my recommendation, is to support the officer, go away and think about it. And if they are passionate about it, they will accept that and go away and find out how to provide all of those answers, not within some hard-lined 2-month window, but in however long it takes, and come back with the right solution, then the planning department can consider that at that time. That's
So you will be agreeing with the officer's recommendation, but hoping they're going to come back when they've got all their ducks in a row. Okay, Councillor Lay.
I'd like to say to you that I'm not against this application. I'm against every application in all our villages across the whole of East Cambs where we are giving planning permission of any sort outside the stop lines of the local plans. So I am going to support that we support the officers and reject this application.
Do I take that you are seconding Keith?
I am indeed, yes.
You are seconding it?
Yes.
Councillor Colbert.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm delighted to second Councillor Hufford's proposal to defer it. I'm not sure about the time scale. I'm not a good judge of that, but I think we desperately need help for our animals. I've had to travel miles with baby hedgehogs to take them to people who will care for them. And without fail, these have been ladies who have been looking after animals in their kitchens, spare rooms, sheds, wherever they can find a place to put the little things. And they have then successfully reared them and returned them to either the places from whence they came or other suitable places in the wild, not just let them loose in an adjacent field. I believe wholeheartedly in this type of project. I think these are wonderful women to have brought it forward, and I'm terribly sorry that it's such a struggle for them. I truly 100% want them to succeed. Thank you.
I'm not 100% wedded to the 8 weeks or 2 months. I mean, if we need to give them 3 months, if that's what they need, then we'll give them, I would recommend 3 months. It's really up to the
Sure, you heard me say that discussion should go through the chair.
Huge apologies, Chair. You're overexcited. Too much sugar on the bus.
But am I right in Councillor Colbert is seconding your proposal to defer? And you, members, more comments, please. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very difficult one. I mean, the current situation for Sue, the applicant, is unsustainable in that I first got a call about this from Angie Curtis back in, I met her and the applicant, obviously it's in my ward, back on the bonfire night. It was 5th of November. And I sit here now and I agree with what's being said there, that there's a lot in the application that's not there. There's lots of, you know, for whatever reason, there's lots of information that we as a planning committee and officers need before they could even consider passing it. I personally don't think 3 months is long enough, looking at all of the stuff that needs to be put through. And I understand Councillor Horgan's point that what we don't want to do is give the applicants hope that they'll come, they address all of the things and then come back and it still gets refused here. But I'm torn because obviously I think and I disagree very much with Councillor Horgan as well about, yes, the lady Sue may not have medical qualifications, but I think she's done it by track record in terms of 17 years doing this. So that wouldn't worry me if I had a live hedgehog.
Too late.
Too late if it was a dead one, yeah.
Biblical.
Yeah, I would be happy taking it to her. So I am really torn here in that I don't feel comfortable passing it, but equally I'm more sympathetic to deferral. But again, I wouldn't want the applicant to think, oh, you know, we'll go through, do it all, and then walk away in 3 months, whatever, with an approval. Because I think there are still some big issues that even going through and answer all the questions have to be overcome. There are some big, you know, principles around some of the growth which you're not going to be able to overturn. So I'm veering towards agreeing with my colleague on the right. But it's been one that.
Both on the right.
Yeah, we're both on the right, yeah. But
I was going to ask for clarification there as whether you're, which of the two, which of the two on the right?
my immediate right, yeah.
Which one?
I'm leaning towards deferral rather than refusal.
You're a referral.
But as I say, I've always kept I've seen both sides of the argument on this for the last 8 months since I first had the approach about the principle. It's I'm still very torn as to which way we go.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Christine Colbert is first and then Councillor Lay.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one small point to what I said. Of these wonderful women that I've taken hedgehogs to in the past, I very much regret that the one in Chatteris died fairly recently. So that's one, in all probability, that's one less hedgehog. That the lady that ran the rescue. So I suspect that's one less rescue that we have. Thanks, that's all. Just wanted members to know that.
Thank you, Chair. Before we defer, I was just wondering if we could ask the lady could come up and say she could accept a deferral and how much time they would need. Otherwise, it'd be wrong to go for a deferral if they can't handle it.
Yeah. Thank you. I do appreciate the amount of thought you've given this. Thank you. And I would like to mention that it is a veterinary wildlife hospital. There would be a vet on site working alongside Sue doing the operations. Sue doesn't do operations, Sue cares for the animals, so there would be a vet. But so far as deferral, we will take what we're given and be very grateful. I think 12 weeks would be realistic. We went to consultants who didn't not know what we wanted. They just didn't do any work. We went to them after a month and they hadn't done anything. It wasn't that we didn't know what we wanted. So 12 weeks, yes, please. Yeah, we'll give it our best shot and accept that it's in your power. Thank you.
Thank you. You can sit down now. Okay. I got his hands probably larger.
I was just going to offer an olive branch, Chair, if I may. As my proposal to refuse the application was seconded before the opposing view, with your agreement and of other fellow officers, if the order in which they're voted on, i.e. the deferral first rather than my proposal, yeah, if that then gets accepted, we then don't need to vote on mine. It just might make things a little easier, if you understand.
I understand exactly, and that's why when I've had these various proposals, I've written down who said it first, well,
I'd be happy to go second.
I've got there here first, Julia. So,
well, yeah, she proposed first, but it was seconded after Councillor Lay seconded mine. So mine technically, I think, and so whoever.
Well, I'm going to make a
decision. Was that case then? I don't need to say anything.
I've just asked one question, thanks.
yes,
James speak.
hold on a second.
This isn't a question you can answer, Julia, but it's probably more one for the applicant. If we are minded to defer, are the applicant willing to agree to an extension of time to cover both the deferral period and any reconsultation period? Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lay.
This is my ward, the Wood Ditton ward. And I'll remind you what I've just said to you all. When applications come in here that are outside the stop lines of your villages, I will not support them, because I believe that our villages have decided where they want development to happen within their villages. So I could not support any application across the whole of this area where we are deciding to go against the stop lines. So that's where I sit.
Okay, so I will be having two votes. Councillor Huffer's proposal will go first, but I don't want anybody to sort of think, oh, that was the first, that's the better, or that's second best, whatever. You'll have two votes, and then we will act on those two votes.
Well, if it's deferred, then you could have the second one. So if the first one goes through, you don't need to have the second one.
Well, it depends what the result is.
I'm saying if it goes through.
If it goes through. So we may have two. Right, so we have first of all a proposal from Councillor Huffer, which is seconded by Councillor Colbert, which is to defer the application that is in front of me. You will be having another one, maybe or not, when that's done. So we're going to do that now. So those in favour of Councillor Huffer's, please raise their hand. Will those who are anti please raise their hand? That is supporting the officer's recommendation.
No, it's rejecting the deferral.
Sorry, the deferral.
Who's against the deferral?
I'm against the deferral. And then have we got any abstentions? One. So we have a decision now where the committee has voted to defer the application, and I think I will just have a discussion with the head of planning to find out some of the mechanics of that operation.
So just to clarify to members, we will be deferring it for 3 months as per the discussion. We will then, as officers, seek to bring it back to the first available committee following the closure of any consultation period. Should information not come in to satisfy officers, clearly we'll bring it back to an earlier committee once that date is closed.
So applicants, you've got your decision. It's that it's going to be deferred. It will be written to, and that will come to you within a few days. And those of you who are interested in this particular application can leave if they want or stay if they want. I think we will, just bearing in mind the time, I think we will have about a 7-minute comfort break, which will then be we will be
item 7 for a application for works to trees protected by preservation order. Right. Can't get much closer to the microphone. Okay. This is for item 7, so it's a tree work application for the removal of 2 trees that are covered by a preservation order, located on land adjacent to Broughton Hall and Lode Road, Lode. Got a overview showing the location of the 2 protected trees that are part of this. They're protected as part of a group TPO that includes another horse chestnut to the centre and down from those 2. And it's the overhead showing the 2. So it's T1 and T2 are the trees in the proposal. T3 would be the remaining one. Okay. The proposal is to remove the 2 trees and treat them with a herbicide to prevent them regrowing due to drying of the soil and shrinkage and related to subsidence of the neighbouring property. Some photos of the trees from different angles, and those who came out on site will have seen that they're quite substantial size within the locality, particularly visible from heading out of the village. So the main considerations are the amenity value of the trees, the desire of the local residents to retain the trees, the possible cost implications to East Cambs if the trees are retained, and the impacts of on the resident of the property that's affected by the subsidence claim. The impact on the amenity of the area of the retained trees should the 2 trees be removed. So the trees were given I ran through the tempo score, which we use for assessing TPOs, to give a score as of what they'd be like now as opposed to when they were done. As you can see, the scores are still high and would still now merit a protection by a preservation order. This is the CAVAT evaluation of the trees. This is a system that's used widely in this country for giving a monetary value to the trees. As you can see, it's a substantial cost with T1 at just over 100,000 and T2 at £200,000. We have received comments from 3 properties and the parish council expressing their desire to retain the trees due to they value the appearance of the trees, and not only from the property where they've commented from. The trees are a significant part of the local landscape, and they have suggested that careful cutting back of branches overhanging the property might be acceptable. The trees are of significant visual and environmental amenity and should be retained. And the horse chestnuts are particularly significant given their size and age, and therefore their carbon capture potential and shade they provide and habitats they hold. We're concerned that the felling of such important trees will create a precedent for such action in the future. The possible cost implications are that repairs to the property relating to damage that occurs after the application, if it was refused, could be in the region of £90,000 to £130,000, depending on the extent of the works required, such as in underpinning, drain repairs and redecoration, etc. These costs would not be covered by any existing insurance policy by East Cambs, and it would need to come out of the East Cambs funding. This is some images from the tree report showing the damage. So the circled areas on the left-hand photo are the areas where the subsidence damage has occurred. The right-hand circle of that, the trees nearby have already been removed and as marked on the level monitoring information next to it, which is has been done as dated over a period of nearly 3 years now, showing that the trees move at different times of the year, but are not coming up generally to their original position with the ground levels. This is just from the points that are nearest to the affected trees, just showing the millimetres in difference from the base level. at those visits. So the residents of the property would be affected if the house is underpinned. It generally takes between 4 and 6 weeks to complete. So although the exact duration can depend on the size of the house and other complexities that we might not be aware of at the moment. Some methods like resin injection, which is literally a liquid that's squirted into the soil to bond it together, may be quicker than traditional methods, but the use of that is not widely done at the moment. So the effects on the area of the loss of these size trees will be evident for many years. The retained tree will also need a lot of pruning to mitigate the loss of the shelter given by the other 2 trees. There'll be a loss of habitat through bird nesting, bees, mosses, lichens, and just many things. They're a food source for many animals, the horse chestnuts, and their fruit. So from an arboricultural point of view, I would recommend retaining the trees, but that doesn't take into account the cost implications to the council, which is the reason for being here.
We've got a letter from Michael Dawson to be read out.
Thank you, Chair. The letter starts, we are the arboriculturists commissioned to make the planning application for consent to fell the 2 horse chestnut trees the subject of the application. Excuse me. We understand that a decision will be made by the planning committee and we will respectfully ask this statement be read to the committee. My name is Michael Lawson and I'm Chief Executive of the supporting agricultural consultancy, a chartered biologist, chartered surveyor and member of the Academy of Experts. I have given evidence in all the courts on both criminal and civil matters relating to trees and have been an appointed single joint expert to the Technology Court in London on matters of trees, subsidence and liability. I have 35 years' experience of tree-related subsidence cases and have written multiple peer-reviewed papers on the subject. I've reviewed all the evidence supporting this application, and I would stress the timing and pattern of movement, the view of a professional engineer, the soil types being plastic and cohesive clays, the presence of roots of horse chestnut, all confirm that this is a tree-related subsidence and that the horse chestnut are the substantial and effective causes of movement. At only 7 metres from the property, the trees are well within their known zones of influence, and the pattern of movement means they are undoubtedly causal in the movements witnessed. The close proximity means that a pruning remedy would have to request at 80 to 900% of leaf area. Horse chestnut responds very badly to heavy pruning, and this level of tissue removal would likely have killed these mature trees. The close proximity means a root barrier cannot be safely and effectively inserted down to 3 metres, only a few metres from the trees. The council are able to conditionally require replacement trees, and we welcome this with species to be agreed. Should the council refuse consent, then the public purse would be liable to a claim in compensation for all costs, including and not limited to full engineering underpinning. Any engineered scheme is very costly, and the CO2 required in concrete, steel, and delivery and other movements outweigh any advantage from the trees. Should approval be given, we will automatically be replacing the lost trees as part of our own global tree replacement planting scheme backed by insurers. We respectfully ask the members to support this application and grant consent to fell the 2 trees. Michael Lawson, Chief Executive, Property Risk Executive Team.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And we move on to the Parish Council, Councillor Lucy Wells. I don't know if you've been here before, but you've got 5 minutes. The amber light will come on at 4, and you should press the microphone to start going and start when you wish.
Thank you very much. Lode Parish Council strongly objects to the decision that these trees be removed
and ask that this decision be reconsidered. Whilst Lode Parish Council is sympathetic to the homeowner of 46 Lode Road and the concerns over shrinkage to their home's foundations, we have a number of comments and questions to relay to the committee. Lode has recently seen a substantive loss of significant trees, which has had a detrimental effect on the village environment in numerous ways. A large maple near the entrance to the village was mistakenly removed by ECDC a few years ago. The mature hedgerow opposite these horse chestnuts in question was removed with planning permission recently during bird nesting season, as was another large hedge, again with planning permission, including at least 3 sycamores, holly and many other species around the chapel, again in nesting season. The 2 horse chestnuts are on the main road into the village, so are known, although perhaps taken for granted by all residents. They are very large and well formed and would be noticeable in their absence. We understand that they are each probably over 100 years old. They no doubt provide habitat for a number of species. Their carbon capture potential has already been well documented by Trees Officer Kevin Drain. They also provide much needed shade for several houses nearby, as well as pedestrians and cyclists. They're a long-standing feature of that corner of the village, and their removal would reduce the aesthetic appeal of the village. The trees were in situ decades before the house affected was built, as will be the case for several other trees situated near houses in the village. We are concerned that the felling of these trees will create a precedent for easy agreement of felling applications in the future. We would like to understand what other actions could be considered in advance or instead of a decision to fell, and ask ECDC to at the very least, consider a stepwise solution rather than an immediate decision to fell these 2 trees. Is, for example, the house under immediate threat? We understand that the rate of subsidence has been monitored since 2023. What do those results actually tell us? How fast is the problem developing? Could the situation be monitored for a few more years? If the concern for ECDC is litigation further down the line, could that not be mitigated for now by works carried out on the house? We understand from reports that removal of these trees does not guarantee to solve the problem for the homeowner. Indeed, removing them in this case could exacerbate some of the issues caused by our recent weather changes, i.e. further warming or flooding, which is a particular problem on that corner of the village. What mitigation measures are ECDC prepared to make when it comes to preserving large trees? Is there any other work that can be carried out on the trees which might reduce their moisture uptake? Is it or will it be necessary to fell both trees? They are situated at differing distances from the problem area of the property. If felling is inevitable at some stage in the future, we'd like to ask ECDC to consider succession planting of trees now in order to plan for potential felling many years into the future. Indeed, are there any other trees in the village where there are potential or identifiable issues for which succession planting could be put in place now? The Parish Council would welcome such an audit. We all have to live and exist in partnership with the environment. With climate change being a real issue, the removal of these trees would seem a short-term and detrimental measure when works on the house could potentially be carried out to enable the house and trees to exist alongside each other. This is a less wooded county than some, so each large tree could be regarded as more valuable than in other areas. Lode Parish Council hopes that by considering our concerns and questions, you might look favourably on keeping these very old, large, handsome, shade and life-giving trees, giving them the opportunity to contribute to the health of the village for hundreds more years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, questions for the chairman of Lode Parish Council? Corbett, it's your go.
Do you know if anyone has sorry to go back a bit, the hedgerows, they were actually taken down when birds were nesting? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, it's going a bit off the subject. It's illegal. Okay. Do you know if anyone's studied the possibility of one of the trees being removed, the one that's nearer to the house?
No, we don't, and that's one of the questions that I wondered could be considered if this isn't refused.
Okay, and the other question was, can you tell me please approximately how old the house is?
The house, I don't know, but it looks as though it's a sort of perhaps a 1930s bungalow. I might be a bit later.
Okay, well, if it was that old, it wouldn't have had planning permission from us, but you think it's, oh, okay. Okay, thank you, thank you.
Alan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lucy. You may not be able to answer this, but do we know, obviously we've got Lode Fen, which is just the other side of the village. Is any of this subsidence around due to peat rather than anything else? Do you know?
Yes, we understand that it's clay in this case. So nothing to do with the peat, and it's way beyond, it's not in that same area at all.
Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Kevin, have you got anything you want to say extra?
Just quickly on the hedgerows, the law is that you can't disturb a nesting bird, but you can actually do works to hedges or trees during nesting season.
Questions for Kevin? Oh, Keith.
Thank you.
Julia.
Again, a couple of questions. Are you satisfied to a reasonable enough level that the trees are contributing to the problem of subsidence in this case?
The evidence provided matches tree-related subsidence. I've got no concerns that the trees are not the causational to the damage that's noted.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, when we visited site this morning, there was no external visible evidence of cracking of exterior walls or anything like that. Was it just that we didn't look at the right part of the wall, or could it not be seen from outside?
I believe the cracking is on a different face to where we were looking from, and mostly visible from the inside of the property.
Finally, am I right in thinking that now a problem has been identified and the insurance company for the homeowners involved, that leaving aside for one moment whether or not the trees are felled, they have an obligation to take action to remedy the problem for their client? Is that reasonable?
My understanding is that the removal of the trees is there.
No, sorry, let me just rephrase the question. They have an obligation to do whatever's necessary to fix the problem for their client. Is that correct?
I don't know the details of their insurance policy, but generally it is they're deemed to do what is necessary to stabilise that property. There's no specification as to how they do that.
No, I appreciate nobody's telling them how to do that, but problem's been identified, that the homeowner wants some remedial action taken to stop the problem getting worse, but equally to repair the existing damage. So I don't think it's unreasonable, and please tell me if you think it is, that assuming that a reasonable action is for them to do some form of underpinning, which I believe, have we seen the information that they are going to have to do some sort of remedial action anyway because of the damage to the property already, that they need to do something to fix it, the insurance company?
From the information provided, the remedial repairs they're talking about are going to be mostly like decoration and filling cracks.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Huffer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if there's a question for you, Kevin, or for David, or for Maggie, is somebody needs to explain to me why an insurance company wants 2 trees felled that are not on their property, that are, and I quote the tree man, within the known zones of influence when the bungalow was built. So they knew there were 2 chuffing great trees there. So why was work not, or when the bungalow was built, why wasn't stronger foundations put in for a start? You probably can't answer this. But why in God's green earth are East Cams going to be liable for that bungalow's underpinning because the insurance company is too cheap to do the right thing? I mean, I've just got to say it. I am so sick of insurance companies. No more sugar for me.
Councillor Huffer, we will be getting to the
Sorry.
debate period,
I don't-
which is more suitable for arm waving and.
I don't understand why East Cams will be responsible for.
But Kevin doesn't know.
If we go along with the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Well,
I don't understand. Can somebody
Fortunately, we have a lawyer with us who will.
We do. So
who-
this is probably for you.
I don't know how insurance companies come to their conclusions about what they will cover and what they won't cover. I think Kevin actually is more qualified to answer that than I am.
So the reason the East Cams would take responsibility for costs would be if we refused the removal of those trees, because we know there is a fault there and we are refusing them their ability to deal with it in their proposed way.
So although the trees were there 60, 70 years before the bungalow was built. So when the bungalow was built, they were aware that the trees were there. They didn't just suddenly sprout up in the night. That's what I'm saying.
No, the trees have been there for a very long time.
So when the insurance company took on that property, they knew the trees were there.
They should have done because it should have been declared,
Yes,
but
due
the
diligence
building,
should have been done.
the building will have been constructed
Yeah.
at the.
Do you think we could move on to councillor Lay?
Thank you, Chair. My question really is about damage evaluation. It would appear from what we have in front of us that we could have a liability. And I just wondered whether or not we should have used somebody independent on behalf of us as a council to have a look at the damage to that bungalow, us not taking the word of a third party saying this is what needs to be done and this is what it might cost you. Do you understand the question?
I understand the question. I'm not sure that we don't generally do that. It's the people doing the report are an independent company, and that's what they do is they assess properties. We would if we got somebody independent, they would look at the same results and the same evidence that they've got. They dug holes, they found tree roots that they sent to an independent laboratory that identified them as coming from the horse chestnut. They tested the soil in a standardized manner, also at a laboratory as well as on site. They've monitored how the trees are moving, which matches with seasonal growth of the tree. That's really as far as it would go.
Chair, can I just say thank you? I think we do understand.
I understand what you're trying to do, and I would agree. The trees apparently have been there for 150 years. Certainly, looking at the house concerned, it's a 1960s or 1970s house. So the trees were well and truly there when the house was built. And you could argue, I don't know whether it's right or not, but you could argue it's grossly irresponsible to put a house right where the tree roots were. You could argue that. And also, it's quite clear from my visit to Lode this morning that they've got a beautiful village on their hands. It's a small, old-fashioned, beautiful village, and the parish council, in my view, are quite rightly looking to protect it. And that's what I think. Anyway, have we got any more? Yes, we have. We've got, Alan, a question for officers.
I think my question is basically, I think our debate is going to be very similar to what Councillor Huff is going to say. But my question, I think you've touched on it, is what, and it may be nothing because in those days they probably didn't think about it. I think the liability of anything falls upon the builder who constructed that building 60, 70, 50, 60 years ago. Who's probably, yeah. But you know, I think that's where it lies, and I'll save my comments about insurance companies for the debate because it's not really a question. Thank you.
Can I just come back on that? The property would have been built at the time to confirm with the existing building regulations at the time, which building regulations, as we know, are constantly changing and evolving. So they have changed an awful lot in the last few years from what they were even 10 years ago.
If I can come back though on that then, Chair, please. If the building, and I understand what Kevin's saying, if the building was built in line with the whatever building regulations were in force at the time, then why, and I'm sure it's the law, I'm sure Maggie will tell us why, but why can then the insurance company claim against East Cams rather than actually do what they say they should do with their client, which is actually pay liabilities when they become due, rather than just trying to get money off the council?
Well, they would only be attempting to get money off the council if we stopped them by refusing the application to remove the trees. If we stop them by doing that, that is their way of dealing with those costs. They will pay for the cost of removing the trees, and that's how they deal with it.
I think we can park the responsibilities and the moral standards of insurance companies, which seems to be getting more Christian and more sensible every day, as we know. And I think that's not a thing that should be included in this discussion. And I think we should go to my vice chair, who has got a question for the officer.
Yeah, it's on the space of liability again. Surely the liability is with the house owner, not ECDC, because they should have had a survey done before they got a mortgage, and therefore they take full responsibility for the survey not picking it up.
I would guess that when the survey was done, there were no issues noted and no expected. We've had a changing climate. Our soil is drying, and that is making these things a lot more common. You can look at the statistics, and there's a lot more cases of subsidence now than there was a few years ago.
But that's not East Cambridge District Council's responsibility for that house.
No, it would only be our responsibility. The insurance company's agents are proposing mitigation for the damage that's done to the property, which is the removal of the trees. We, as a council, would only be responsible for costs if we refused what is their way of dealing with that.
We are on a section called questions for officers. We are about to go to debate when this section's finished. So please, if it's a question for the officer that can be answered yes, no, I don't know, or I do know, it would be very helpful. We're now moving on to Keith.
Thank you, Chair. When I had an extension built, one of the questions I was asked was were there any trees in the vicinity, what type of trees they were and how far away. Obviously that was very recent. Am I right in assuming that 50, 60 years ago, when we believe this bungalow was built, did those sort of questions exist at that time? Do we have any idea?
Simple answer is no. So the current planning application form was called the One App form, and that was brought in a sort of about 2008. Prior to that, we had a slightly simplified version, and prior to that, it was pretty much a one sheet of paper form.
Right. So on the basis that when that bungalow was built, the proximity of trees was of less important relevance than currently. That's an assumption of mine. Is that a reasonable assumption?
It's hard for me to give you an exact answer on that because I'm not aware of what your local plan would have said about the time, and certainly it's way before my time with an area of expertise when it comes to what the planning laws would have said. I think it's fair to say that it's become more ingrained into sort of policy and legislation.
Last question. So around that time, the 1960s or 70s, compared to what we see today, how big would those trees have been relative to as they are today, please?
It's very hard to know exactly. I suspect the trunk diameter would have probably have been about that much narrower, maybe. Yeah. So not greatly. So 2-3 inches difference across the diameter of the tree of the trunk.
So, I mean, can you give me a percentage? Would they have been half the size they are now? Would they have been 75%? Just to, you know how quickly trees grow or don't grow of that nature over, because if they're 100, 150 years old, that's probably half to a third of their life ago.
They'd probably only be a maximum of 10% smaller than they are now. Once trees get
okay,
to a growth
Councillor
stage,
Colbert.
their growth slows down massively, so they don't grow very much at all.
Councillor Colbert.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Could we please have questions through the chair, please? I did ask not to have conversations going on between various people, and would appreciate them coming through the chair. Councillor Colbert.
Thank you very much. If I could just ask the officer, please, I assume Mr. Drain, is it feasible to consider the removal of just the house that's somewhat closer? Sorry, not the removal of the house. Sorry, so sorry. Consider the removal of the tree, which is somewhat closer to the house than its fellow, or do they both have to go to satisfy the report?
The information in the report requires that both trees are removed, but the decision to allow the removal of just one instead of two can be made by this committee.
Okay, thank you.
We've now got Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Just one very quick question for Kevin. What when the house was built, say 60 years ago, how much further would the roots of those horse chestnut trees have spread roughly? How much have they grown over time, shall we say? Obviously, it's a general question. We don't know exactly.
I would expect that when they built that property, they dug through some of the tree roots to put it in.
Thank you, Kevin. So, sorry, through you, Chair. So the roots were actually there. The roots were probably there or in that vicinity when they built the bungalow.
Yes, looking at the level change where they installed the driveway, I suspect when they put the driveway in, they went through the majority of the tree roots that are on that side of the property.
Thank you. We now move on to debate.
Sorry, Chair, there is a statement from local member.
I await your
local member.
The gentleman who came in at the last minute. Councillor Trapp has written to you. Will you please read his letter out?
Thank you, Chair. This is from the ward member, Councillor John Trapp. I regret, with regard to the above consideration by Planning Committee on 2nd of July, I've looked at the site with parish council members. It does seem a pity to me that such an elegant and stately tree in a dominating location should be felled. A number of residents have made similar comments in their replies. It seems ironic that trees that have existed well before the building of a house adjacent to them should be felled because that may cause problems to the new arrival. It is not the current owner's fault that this has happened. It is the fault of anyone who was instrumental in the building of this house so close to a well-established tree. I can accept that the planting of a tree subsequent to the building of a house may be a reason for its removal if it's detrimental to the long-term stability of the house, but not if the tree was the first arrival. A similar situation has arisen in Cambridge City and the council decided to retain the tree. Future planning applications should be advised that the possible damage from long-established trees should be considered at the planning stage and planning be refused on the ground of possible loss of the trees. Yours sincerely, Councillor John Trapp.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to debate. And who is first?
Julia.
Well, Councillor Huffer, I've been waiting for you to speak again.
And I won't wave my arms this time. I would like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation to refuse the felling of these beautiful trees. And I would ask that our legal department fight the insurance company, if necessary, with handbags out on the green to make sure that the Weasel insurance company, you don't have to minute that, Patrick, do the right thing and put their hands in their pockets and pay up as they should to look after this house. It's as their own expert said, it was within the known zone of influence of that tree and trees when the bungalow was built. When the insurance company took on that bungalow, the trees were already there. It should not be our responsibility to pay for the bungalow to be underpinned. It should be the insurance company.
You may have heard me speaking, and I think I had exactly the same view as you.
Yeah, so I'm happy to propose, Chair.
And I've made a note of you.
Thank you, Chair.
First proposing it. Who have we got now to speak under debate? Keith.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the passion and the sugar-driven rush that may be going on. As always, we have to make a decision based on the information in front of us. And the information that I understand is in front of us, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, is that we have a professional and independent opinion that the damage to the bungalow is primarily down to the two trees adjacent to the property, drawing moisture, water out of the soil. And were that to continue, they're not asking us to pay the 90 to 100,000 pounds to underpin it, which may or may not need to be done. But what I guess that number refers to is the cost that we might incur if we refuse permission and further damage occurs to the property over and above to that which has occurred already. And the move to remove the trees is to, without any guarantees, to try as best as possible to stop further damage, which is, as we've heard, at the superficial level at the moment. And whilst I'm truly wholly sympathetic to the I don't want to be held over a barrel by any insurance company, I struggle to ignore the advice of a professional independent person who is saying the problem is these two trees and the only way to stop it getting worse is to remove them. So on that basis, I think I'm going to struggle to refuse the application at this present time unless I'm given any additional information which hasn't been presented yet.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm also struggling somewhat with this. I'd be a lot happier if it was just an application to remove one of the trees, but unfortunately it isn't. If I can say something about insurance as a past chartered insurance practitioner in my former life, and I'm not and I'm not going to defend them because the insurance world changed very much about the time I chose to leave it. Insurance policies are annual contracts, and the insurance industry learned a considerable lesson after 1976 when there was a drought and lots of houses were underpinned. And then when we got a lot more rainfall, they then started to rise up again, and the underpinning did more harm than than good. So I strongly suspect that an insurance company won't actually do anything for an awfully long time. Whatever happens, it will sit around and scratch a bit, and the poor old householder will have to work out what's happening. And they might arrive at the position where they can't get insurance. So this is why I'm still mulling this over a bit. I'll be pleased to hear what other members have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second Councillor Huffer's proposal to refuse the application, and so go along with officer recommendation. And I'll touch on a number of points. The tree roots, the answer Kevin gave to me just now, and where the tree roots were in all likelihood there when that bungalow was built. So I'm sure when buildings are built now, and I remember this from planning applications, a lot of it's refused, or there's building techniques to protect the tree roots. Probably in those days they didn't worry about it; they just dug through them. So the tree was there first, 150 years ago. I mean, I think it's sacrilege to bring down 2 trees like that that have been there for so long, and I couldn't support that. I'm going to be a bit controversial. Is it Mr. Michael Dawson who we read the letter out? I mean, I think the first third of it was telling us all the qualifications and how wonderful he was. I mean, I think he's the expert on being pompous and patronising. So I don't pay any weight to what he says. Insurance companies, I just think, just duck and dive to avoid paying out whatever they can get away with. And that's a very general comment. And I'm sure there's good insurance companies out there as well as there are bad. And
Many.
Yeah, weighed against my feeling on this, obviously, if we do go ahead with this, and I share Julia's point that we fight it tooth and nail if they come looking, it is tentatively money coming from the public purse. And as chairman of the Finance and Assets Committee, I can't sit here and say I want potentially 90 grand or whatever it is spent out of the public purse. But in weighing it all up, we need to protect those trees. So I would be voting to protect those trees.
Thank you for that, Councillor Sharp. My experience with insurance companies, they try it on in the first place, and then they'll stitch the owner of the house up with an increased premium, and then they'll do nothing. That's my experience. I may have come across some of the less ethical ones, but Councillor Colbert.
I'm trying to remember some of the case law that I learned a long time ago, and I can't. I think that we might find ourselves being legally liable for damage if we don't allow the removal, insofar as whilst the insurance company might settle the householder's claim, the insurance company would then have a right to claim against us if we're legally liable, because there are such things as joint contract terms, and it used to be JCT 2121, I think, which required the owner of a building to not do anything to remove the support of the adjacent building. And I simply don't know if there's anything of a similar nature which applies to buildings and trees. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. I'm just throwing that into the mix. So then I can see that there might be an argument for us being liable for damage if we refuse the removal of the trees.
Thank you. We're still on debate. Me.
Thank you, Chair. I feel that we're being held ransom here by the insurance company to do their will and go by the cheapest option on their point. They have a contract with the person who lives in the house. That contract is to repair any damages. from their house. They have no control over the trees. And there are other methods of dealing with this, which are a little bit more expensive, and the insurance company don't want to pay out. Well, that's tough. You've taken the money from your client, pay out. We should not be liable afterwards because, like I said, them trees have been there a good 100 years before the house or the bungalow. And as Kevin rightly said, them roots were going under them foundations from the day they built it. So they knew they were there. The person living in the house had quite rightly taken out insurance to protect the house and their asset. And the problem they'll have now is where if they want to sell on and they got this subsidence and the insurance company won't pay out. But there is another thing the insurance company could do. The risk is higher for them. They can put the premiums up next year after they've done it. That's how the business works. So it's the same if I have a car accident, my premium goes up the next year. So there we go. And so I'll be voting to refuse this.
Councillor Lay.
I have one concern. We know what our liabilities may be at this point in time. If we refuse to take these trees down, we don't know whether or not there'll be further damage done to the property, and our liability may be greater than it is at this point in time.
Any more? Did I? Keith?
You, Chair. I've actually been involved in this situation when I previously lived in London, and one of the neighbours had significant subsidence damage to their property, and it was proven to be caused by lime trees, which were owned and controlled on the public highway by the local council. And we worked with a number of experts. We worked with my local borough councillor, etc., etc. And the sad news for the homeowner was up until the point at which the lime tree was identified as causing and responsible for the damage, then obviously he would claim, or in fact she in this particular case, she would claim on her house insurance for the repairs, but the council was in no way liable at that point for the damage caused to the property. It was only once it was established beyond reasonable doubt that this particular lime tree was the cause of the problem, that if the council then chose to do nothing after that point, after that, the council and not the insurance company were then responsible for any further costs and repairs to the property. So we, as I think Councillor Lay has quite rightly alluded to, we don't know what the costs are going to be if the property continues to be damaged. You know, God forbid it could fall down if it was left unattended. Now, obviously, hopefully that was not going to happen. But the problem is that at this point, we have no cost liability against us. So we're not looking to pay 90 or £130,000 or anything now, other than granting an approval of having the 2 trees felled. That's now that indirectly has a cost, a nature cost, but not a financial cost. If we refuse and the property is further damaged going forward, and we have refused to allow the removal of the 2 offending trees at this point, from my personal experience of the past case in London, we are completely liable for all costs to that property, which might include underpinning, it might include having it knocked down and rebuilt, could be anything, but we just don't know. So just bear that in mind before you vote.
Getting your fair share of airtime.
Yes, sorry, I'm taking a lot of airtime. In the light of what Keith's just said, I am more inclined to approve the removal of the trees. What I would have liked to have done was to propose that we gave permission to remove the tree nearer to the house. But having run it through my mind, there will inevitably be movement after one tree is removed, and we shall then be blamed for leaving the second tree in place, I expect. So much as I would much rather the trees stayed there, I think I'm going to have to vote in favour of their removal. Thank you.
We have a councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree totally with councillor Horgan. I understand where he's coming from in terms of cost for the council, but I think this is really a massive point of principle. We should not be removing those trees, and we should fight tooth and nail with the insurance company, because they're just the well, no, I won't go there. But yeah, I 100% support that we go with officers. And
Well, you're seconding the motion.
yeah, I've seconded it already. I did that earlier. Yeah, thank you.
So we now have.
Yes, I just wanted to come back on something that Councillor Horgan has just said, because the case you're mentioning in London, they were trees that were on district council land. Therefore, they were just these trees aren't even on the property's land. These trees are on somebody else's land, and they want it taken down, and they have no control over if we granted permission to take them out. They're talking about planting trees elsewhere. Load don't want trees planted elsewhere. They want their trees where they are now, where they either happened or grew or were planted 150 years ago.
That's been made very clear by the parish council
Absolutely,
representatives.
yes. And I just would like to explain to the parish council, we aren't asking for this to happen. This is not East Cams that are asking for these trees to be removed. This is the insurance company of the bungalow that want these removed. It's not us. I will tie myself to the tree if this comes to it.
Well, we're going to do something slightly less dramatic, and we're going to a vote.